Nearly 2,000 years ago, on a warm and ordinary morning in late summer, you're walking down a narrow stone street in a busy Roman town on the sunlit coast of southern Italy, beneath a great green mountain. The street beneath your feet is paved with worn polygonal stones, rutted by the wheels of countless carts, with high stepping stones set across it so you can cross without dirtying your sandals. On either side rise the walls of houses and shops, painted in warm reds and ochres, their doorways open to the morning. The smell of fresh bread drifts from a bakery. A shopkeeper raises the wooden shutters of his counter. Somewhere a dog barks, and water trickles musically from a public fountain on the corner, and the whole town is waking around you into what seems, in every way, like just another perfectly ordinary day. The town is called Pompeii, and this is its last morning, and tonight, slowly and gently, we're going to walk through it together while it is still alive. So let yourself arrive here in this quiet moment before we begin to wander. There is nothing you need to do tonight except rest and listen and let your mind drift away to a warm morning 20 centuries ago. Settle into whatever position lets the whole day finally fall away from you, the one where your shoulders and your hands and your jaw can at last let go. If you can, dim the lights or let them go out altogether, so the room grows soft and warm and dark around you. Take a slow breath in and let it out even more slowly, and feel yourself grow heavier and stiller with each breath. We have a whole ancient town to wander through, and all the time in the world to do it. Here is the single question I would like us to carry with us tonight, the quiet thread we will follow through the streets of this town and slowly into sleep. What was it actually like to live an ordinary day in a Roman town 2,000 years ago, to walk its streets and shop in its markets and rest in its homes? And how, across all those centuries, do we know it so astonishingly well? Hold that question gently. We're in no hurry to answer it. We will let it unfold as slowly as a warm morning unfolding over the rooftops, in no hurry at all, just as that real morning once unfolded long ago, with everyone in the town quite certain that the day would be like any other. This is sleepy history, and these long, slow journeys into the distant past are made for exactly this hour, when the day is finally behind you and your mind is free to drift somewhere quiet and far away. If you find that these gentle explorations help you rest, you might like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy it and would like to find your way back here on another quiet night. There is nothing you need to do right now. But if you feel like it, before sleep takes you, you might leave a single comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because I love the thought of so many people scattered across so many places and hours, all wandering back together through the same warm and ancient streets. For now, just let yourself grow comfortable. Let the room stay dark and soft around you. Take one more slow breath and let it go. Pull the blanket up if you'd like, or turn on a fan, anything that makes the dark around you feel soft and safe and yours. This video is designed to help you unwind and fall asleep, so nothing tonight will be loud or sudden or sharp. The pace stays slow, the narration stays soft, and if you fall asleep long before our walk through Pompeii is done, that is not a problem at all. That is exactly what this is for. The warm streets will still be here, full of their morning light, the next time you need them. Tonight we're going to walk through this ancient town one slow step at a time. We will begin by getting to know Pompeii itself, this prosperous Roman town and the great green mountain that watched over it. We will wander its streets in the morning and step into its homes and visit its baths and read the words its people scratched upon its walls. We will see how they worked and how they played and what they believed. And then, gently, we will follow the story of its last day and of the long silence that followed and of the astonishing moment 17 centuries later when the town was found again and gave up its secrets. There is no rush. We will linger over each part of the story as long as it deserves. Let us begin, then, by understanding where we are. Pompeii was a Roman town of perhaps some 10 or 20,000 people, set on a gentle rise near the beautiful Bay of Naples in the rich and sunny region the Romans called Campania. It was not a grand capital, not a Rome or an Alexandria, but a thriving, comfortable, ordinary provincial town, a place of merchants and farmers and craftsmen, of busy markets and fine houses and good wine. The land around it was extraordinarily fertile, its soil dark and rich, perfect for vineyards and olive groves and orchards, and the town had grown prosperous on the trade in wine and oil and a famous local fish sauce. And rising behind it all, green and gentle and beautiful, its slopes covered in vineyards stood the great mountain. The people of Pompeii loved that mountain. They built their villas upon its lower slopes and grew their grapes in its rich volcanic soil. They had no idea, none at all, that the mountain was a sleeping volcano, for it had not stirred in living memory, nor in the memory of their grandparents, nor their grandparents before them. To them it was simply the mountain, a thing as permanent and as harmless as the sky. Its name was Vesuvius. It is worth pausing to picture how lovely a place this was to live. The Bay of Naples was one of the most desirable corners of the entire Roman world, a sun-drenched coast of blue water and green hills, dotted with fashionable seaside resorts where the wealthy of Rome built their holiday villas, came to escape the heat of the capital, and idled away the summers. Pompeii sat amid all this abundance, a busy market town serving the rich countryside around it, neither poor nor grand, but comfortable and prosperous and full of life. Its streets were crowded, its houses well kept, its public buildings handsome, and the town carried, on that last morning, the fresh scars of an earlier brush with the power of the earth. For 17 years before, a violent earthquake had shaken the whole region and toppled many of Pompeii's buildings. The town had been rebuilding ever since, and on that final day much of it was still a place of scaffolding and fresh plaster and half-finished repairs, the people patiently restoring their homes and temples, quite reasonably assuming that the worst the earth could do to them had already been done. They could not have known that the earthquake had not been an isolated misfortune but a warning, the first stirring of the sleeping giant beneath their feet. How often, I wonder, do we mistake the first warning for the whole of the danger and set about calmly repairing the damage, with no idea that the true reckoning is still to come? But before we wander into the streets, you may already be wondering the question we always come to. How could anyone possibly know such things about a single ordinary town and a single ordinary day, 2,000 years gone? And here is the strange and terrible miracle at the heart of our story, the thing that makes Pompeii unlike almost anywhere else on earth. For most ancient towns, when they die slowly. They are abandoned and robbed for their stone and rained upon and grown over until little remains but worn foundations and broken pottery. But Pompeii did not die slowly. Pompeii was sealed in a single day beneath a deep blanket of volcanic ash, and there it lay, hidden and protected from the air and the rain and the hand of man for nearly 1700 years. And so, when it was finally found again, it was not a ruin in the ordinary sense. It was a town, very nearly intact, frozen in the middle of an ordinary day. The loaves of bread were still in the ovens, the wine was still in the jars, the paintings were still bright upon the walls, the meals still laid upon the tables, the words still scratched in the plaster. The very thing that destroyed Pompeii also preserved it perfectly, like a single moment of ancient life caught in amber and handed down to us. It is the most complete picture of daily life in the Roman world that exists anywhere, and we shall spend tonight walking gently through it. We are also unusually lucky in another way, for we have an eyewitness, a young Roman named Pliny, whom history calls Pliny the Younger, was staying across the bay on that fateful day, and years later he wrote down in 2 famous letters everything he had seen, the strange cloud rising over the mountain, the darkness, the panic, the ash. His uncle, the great scholar Pliny the Elder, who commanded the Roman fleet nearby, sailed bravely toward the disaster to help and did not return. So we have, in the young man's own careful words, an account of the day itself, written by someone who watched it happen. Between the testimony of that one young witness and the silent testimony of the perfectly preserved town, we can reconstruct the last day of Pompeii and the ordinary life that came before it with a vividness that is almost unbearable and almost unbelievable. So now, knowing a little of how we know, let us step into the living town on that last warm morning and simply wander, the way you might wander a beautiful old town on a holiday with nowhere in particular to be. The streets of Pompeii are narrow and lively, paved with great blocks of grey stone, and as we walk we must mind the high stepping stones set across the road, placed there so that pedestrians could cross over the water and mud that ran down the streets, while the gaps between them let the cartwheels pass. The streets are lined on either side with shops, their wide doorways open to the day, selling bread and pottery and cloth and tools and everything a town could need. Here is a bakery, and if we look inside we can see the great round millstones turned by donkeys or by slaves that ground the grain, and the domed brick oven where the flat round loaves are baked, the very ovens in which, we now know, the bread of that last morning was still sitting when the end came. Here, on a corner, is what the Romans called a thermopolium, a kind of ancient fast food counter, a stone bench with great round jars set into it, from which hot food and warm spiced wine were served to passers-by. For many Pompeians living in small apartments without kitchens of their own ate their meals out in the street, exactly as so many of us do today. Can you picture it? The warm bustle of that morning street, the smell of bread and frying food, the calls of the shopkeepers, the rattle of a cart over the stones, the ordinary music of a town simply going about its day. Let us follow the street as it opens, at last into the great public square at the heart of the town, the Forum. Here was the very centre of Pompeian life, a long open plaza paved in stone and lined with columns, closed to carts and given over to people on foot. Around it stood the most important buildings of the town, the temples to the great gods, the basilica where legal business and trade were conducted, the covered market where meat and fish and produce were sold, and the offices of the town's government. This was where citizens came to hear the news, to argue politics, to make deals, to worship, to see and be seen, the throbbing civic heart of the community, with the green mountain rising serenely beyond its colonnades. and all through the town, at the street corners, stood the public fountains, fed by an aqueduct, where those without running water in their homes, which was most people, came to fill their jars and to gossip with their neighbours, the fountains worn smooth on their edges by the countless hands that had rested there over the years. Water ran constantly through the streets from these fountains, helping to wash them clean, which is why the people needed those high stepping stones to cross. Everywhere there was movement and noise and life. The endless small commerce of a working town repeated that morning, exactly as it had been repeated on 10,000 mornings before. And let us turn now off the busy street and step through a doorway into one of the finer houses, for the homes of Pompeii are among its greatest treasures. From the street, a Roman house often showed only a plain wall, but step inside and the world opens up. First we pass through a narrow entrance hall, sometimes with a mosaic on the floor, and here in one famous house there is a picture of a chained dog and the words Cave Carnum. Beware of the dog, a joke and a warning 2,000 years old. Then the hall opens into the atrium, a tall, cool, beautiful central room, open to the sky in the middle, with a shallow pool set in the floor beneath the opening to catch the rain. The light falls softly down into this space, and around it are arranged the rooms of the house, and beyond the atrium, in the grander homes, lies a peristyle, a private garden surrounded by a covered walkway of columns, planted with flowers and shrubs and little fountains, a green and peaceful heart hidden away inside the house, where the family could sit in the shade on a warm evening. The walls of these homes were not bare. They were covered, floor to ceiling, in glorious painted frescoes, scenes of gardens and gods and myths and landscapes, in deep reds and golds and greens, so fresh and so skillful that when they were uncovered, 17 centuries later, they looked as though the painter had set down his brush only the day before. Is it not a wonderful thing to imagine that hidden piece, the cool atrium, the green garden, the bright painted walls tucked away behind a plain street door 2,000 years ago? Not everyone, of course, lived in such comfort. Pompeii, like any town, held the whole range of human fortune, from the grand mansions of the wealthy to the cramped apartments of the poor, who lived in small rented rooms above and behind the shops, often with no kitchen and little space, which is precisely why the street corner food counters did such a brisk trade. But the finest houses were astonishing. One of them, which we now call the House of the Faun, was so large that it took up an entire town block, with 2 atriums and 2 gardens and floors covered in exquisite mosaics, including a vast and famous mosaic made of more than 1 million tiny coloured stones depicting a great battle of Alexander the Great, a masterpiece of ancient art that lay hidden under the ash for centuries. And throughout the homes of Pompeii, on the floors and the walls, this love of beauty shows itself again and again, in the mosaics and the frescoes, in the careful little gardens, in the painted birds and flowers, in the small bronze statues and the elegant furniture. These were people who loved beautiful things, who wanted their homes to be lovely, who surrounded themselves, as far as their means allowed, with colour and art and grace. Does that not feel deeply familiar, this simple human wish to make a home beautiful, to come back at the end of the day to a place that is pleasant and one's own? And what did a day in such a home actually feel like? The Romans rose early, with the light, for there was little to do once darkness fell but sleep by the dim glow of oil lamps. The main meals were simple for most people: bread and cheese and olives, fruit and vegetables, perhaps a little fish or meat for those who could afford it, all of it seasoned as often as not with that beloved fish sauce. The wealthy might host long, leisurely dinners in the cool of the evening, reclining on couches around a low table in a fine dining room, opening onto the garden, eating and drinking and talking late into the night, served by their household. But for ordinary people, life followed the sun, the morning given to work and errands and the business of the forum, the hot middle of the day given to rest, the afternoon to the baths and to leisure, and the evening to a simple meal and an early bed. It was a life lived largely out of doors, in the warm Mediterranean climate, in the street and the square and the bathhouse, a sociable, sunlit, communal kind of life. And it is precisely this ordinary rhythm, the getting up and the working and the eating and the resting, that Pompeii captured and kept for us, the shape of an ordinary human day, 2,000 years ago, so very like the shape of your own. And the town was full of families, of children and parents and grandparents, living their small domestic lives. We have found the toys the children played with, little clay figures and dolls and dice and game boards. We can see, in the homes, the rooms where families gathered, the kitchens where meals were prepared, the gardens where children must have played in the shade. Roman family life was close and important, the household the very centre of a person's world, and the bonds between parents and children come through to us across the centuries in countless small ways, in loving inscriptions, in the care taken over the home, in the protective charms hung to keep the little ones safe. There were schools where boys and some girls learned to read and write and reckon, sometimes from a teacher in a rented room off the forum, their lessons scratched out on wax tablets. There were weddings and births and funerals, the great turning points of every human life, marked then much as they are now. To wander Pompeii is to wander through a town full of families exactly like our own, with the same loves and worries, the same hopes for their children, the same quiet, ordinary tenderness. Is it not strange and comforting to find that the deepest things, the love of a parent for a child, the warmth of a family at home, are precisely the things that have not changed at all across 2,000 years? But to truly understand the daily life of a Roman town, we must visit its beating heart, which was not the home, but the baths. For the Romans, bathing was not merely about getting clean. It was the great social ritual of the day, the place where the whole town came to meet, to talk, to do business, to exercise, to relax, to gossip, and simply to be together. A Roman bath was a marvel of engineering, with rooms of different temperatures, a cold room, a warm room, and a hot steam room, the floors and walls heated by hot air flowing through hollow spaces, a clever system that kept the rooms wonderfully warm. People would move slowly from room to room, sweating and soaking and scraping the oil and dirt from their skin with a curved tool before plunging into a cool pool at the end. And all the while they would talk and laugh, and the great vaulted halls would echo with the sound of an entire community at its ease. Imagine the warmth of it, the steam rising, the soft echo of voices and water, the deep relaxation of a hot bath at the end of a working day, a pleasure so universal and so timeless that you may very well be longing for exactly the same thing right now as you lie here in the dark. And the baths were open to nearly everyone, for the entry fee was tiny, a coin within the reach of almost any citizen, so that rich and poor alike could share in this daily luxury. There were separate sections or separate hours for men and women, and around the bathing rooms there were often open courtyards for exercise, where men would throw a ball or lift weights or simply stroll, and small rooms where one could buy a snack or a cup of wine, and attendants who would mind your clothes or rub your shoulders with scented oil. A visit to the baths could fill a whole leisurely afternoon, and it was as much a social club as a place to wash. The engineering that made it possible was remarkably sophisticated. A furnace heating both the water and the air, which flowed through hollow spaces beneath the raised floors and inside the walls to warm the rooms evenly, a comfort that much of the world would not see again for many centuries after Rome fell. To sink into that warm water in the soft echoing light, surrounded by the easy murmur of one's neighbours, was perhaps the most purely pleasant hour in the whole Roman day. And here is perhaps the most charming and the most human discovery of all. For the people of Pompeii, like people everywhere and always, could not resist writing on the walls. The plastered walls of the town inside and out are covered in graffiti scratched and painted by ordinary hands, and because they were sealed away and preserved, we can still read them today, the actual, unguarded words of ordinary ancient people, and they are wonderful. There are election notices urging citizens to vote for this candidate or that. There are advertisements for events at the amphitheatre. There are declarations of love and rude jokes and complaints and boasts. Someone wrote simply that they were here. Someone praised the wine at a particular tavern and someone else complained about it. A tired innkeeper, or perhaps a weary traveller, scratched a grumble about the bedbugs. A lover wrote the name of their beloved. A child, it seems, practiced the alphabet. These are not the grand words of emperors and poets, carved for the ages. They are the small, throwaway, living words of ordinary people, the ancient equivalent of a hurried text message, and through them, more than through any monument, we hear the true voice of Pompeii, and we realize with a start that these people were exactly, precisely like us. Does it not collapse the whole distance of 2,000 years to know that an ordinary person on an ordinary day scratched a joke about the wine onto a wall, and that we can still read it and smile? And there are so many of them, these little voices. A schoolboy perhaps scrawled a line he'd been made to copy. A proud man recorded a romantic conquest. Someone scratched a simple greeting to a friend telling them to be well. Outside a tavern, a notice listed the prices of the wine. A weary soul wrote that they wondered how the wall had not yet collapsed under the weight of so much tiresome scribbling. A joke about graffiti, scratched as graffiti 2,000 years ago. There are tallies kept by shopkeepers and the names of gladiators admired by their fans, and snatches of poetry and insults and blessings. To read them is to eavesdrop on a whole town at once, to hear, faintly but unmistakably, the chatter and the laughter and the small daily dramas of people who've been dust for 20 centuries, and who turn out to have been worrying and joking and loving and complaining about exactly the same things we do. Is there any monument in all the world, do you think, that brings the dead back to life quite so gently as a wall covered in their idle scribbles? Beyond the homes and the baths, the town hummed with work and trade. Pompeii was a working town, and its wealth came from the rich land around it. There were the vineyards on the slopes of the mountain, producing the wine that was shipped all across the region. There were fullers, who cleaned and treated the wool and cloth in great vats. There were potters and metal workers and carpenters and bakers and the makers of that famous pungent fish sauce, garum, which the Romans loved to flavour their food with, and which was produced and traded here in great quantities. Down at the nearby coast lay the port, where ships came and went, carrying the goods of Pompeii out into the wide Roman world, and bringing back the goods of distant lands. It was a place of bustling, ordinary, prosperous commerce, the kind of busy working town that has existed in every age, full of people getting and spending, making and selling, earning their daily bread beneath the warm southern sun. We can still see the workshops where this life was lived. There are the fulleries, where workers trod the woolen cloth in vats to clean and thicken it, a smelly but essential trade. There are the workshops of the garum makers, producing that pungent, salty, fermented fish sauce that the Romans drizzled over almost everything, the way we might reach for salt or ketchup, and which made some Pompeian merchants wealthy. There are bakeries with their mills and ovens, and the counters of the wine sellers, and the stalls of the cloth merchants and the lamp makers and the potters. And we should remember too the part of this world that is hardest for us to look at, which is that much of the labour of Pompeii, as of all the Roman world, was done by enslaved people who cooked and cleaned and carried and toiled in the houses and the workshops and the fields, and whose lives were bound to the will of others. It is a sobering thread woven through all the beauty and the comfort, and an honest picture of the ancient world must hold it alongside the frescoes and the gardens. Pompeii shows us the Roman world whole, in its pleasures and its injustices alike, the full and complicated reality of a living human society, not so very different in the end from the mixtures of grace and hardship in every age that has followed. And when the work was done, the people of Pompeii knew how to enjoy themselves. The town had a great amphitheatre, one of the oldest stone amphitheatres anywhere in the Roman world, where crowds of thousands gathered to watch the games and the gladiators, the great public spectacle of Roman life. It had theatres too, where plays were performed, and the people sat on stone tiers under the open sky. It had taverns and inns on every other corner, where one could buy a cup of wine and a hot meal in the company of friends. The walls, as we have seen, advertised the coming attractions at the arena, and we can imagine the excitement in the town on the day of the games, the crowd streaming toward the amphitheatre, the buzz of anticipation. It was a town that worked hard and lived fully, that loved its food and its wine and its spectacles and its gossip, a town as full of ordinary human pleasure as any town has ever been. The amphitheatre deserves a moment of its own, for it is one of the oldest surviving stone amphitheatres in the entire Roman world, built long before the great Colosseum in Rome, and it could hold a crowd of many thousands, very nearly the whole population of the town and visitors besides. Here the people gathered for the games, the contests of the gladiators who fought before the roaring crowd, men who were often enslaved or condemned, but a few of whom won such fame that, as we have seen, admirers scratched their names upon the walls and swooned over them in the graffiti. We even know of one occasion, some years before the end, when a brawl broke out in this very amphitheatre between the people of Pompeii and visitors from a neighbouring town, a riot so serious that it was reported all the way to Rome, and the games were banned for a time as punishment, a small, vivid human drama preserved in the records. The town had its theatres too, a larger one for plays and a smaller covered one for music and recitals, where the people sat on curving stone tiers beneath the open sky and watched the comedies and tragedies of the day. It was a community that knew how to gather and how to be entertained and how to enjoy together the great shared pleasures of public life. And woven through all of it, as in every ancient place, was religion. The Romans had many gods, great and small, and the town had its temples to the major deities, standing grandly in the forum, the great public square that was the civic and religious heart of the town. But religion was not only a public affair. In nearly every home there was a small shrine, a little household altar called a lararium, dedicated to the lares, the guardian spirits of the household, the protective gods of the family and the home. Each day the family would make small offerings at this little shrine, a bit of food, a few drops of wine, a prayer, asking the household gods to watch over them and keep them safe. There is something deeply touching in that, the image of a Roman family on that last ordinary morning, pausing at their little household shrine to ask their gentle gods for protection through the coming day, with no idea of what that day would bring. And the gods of Pompeii were many and varied, reflecting a town open to the whole wide world. In the forum stood the great temples to the chief gods of Rome, but the people worshipped a far richer array than that. There was a temple to Venus, the goddess of love and the special patron of the town. There was a temple to Apollo, very ancient, older than much of the town around it. And strikingly, there was a fine temple to the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose mysterious Eastern cult had become wildly popular in Pompeii, drawing in merchants and women and ordinary folk with its promises of comfort and rebirth, a reminder that the Roman world was a great crossroads, where the gods of Egypt and the East mingled freely with the gods of Italy. People wore little charms, made offerings, consulted the omens, and wove the divine through every part of their days. Their faith was not a thing apart from life, kept for special occasions, but a constant companion, woven into the morning offering and the roadside shrine and the festival in the street. Does it not feel very human, this longing to feel watched over, to believe that some kindly power is keeping us safe as we go about our fragile, ordinary days? For now we must turn, gently, to the mountain. All through that warm morning, Vesuvius stood over the town as it always had, green and quiet and beautiful, its slopes thick with vineyards, giving no sign of what lay sleeping within it. And yet there had been warnings, if only the people had known how to read them. 17 years before, the whole region had been struck by a great earthquake, which had badly damaged Pompeii, and the town had been busily rebuilding ever since, with much of it still under repair on that final day. And in the days just before the end, there had been more tremors, and the springs and wells had behaved strangely, and the animals, some say, had grown restless. But the people of Pompeii had no way of understanding these signs. They did not know that a mountain could explode. They had no word even for what was about to happen. Earthquakes they knew and endured as the price of living in that beautiful land. And so they noted the tremors and shrugged and went about their day, and the warnings passed unheeded because no one alive had ever seen or could even imagine what was coming. Is there not something profoundly human in that? The way we so often cannot see the great change that is upon us because it has simply never happened before in all our experience. And then, around the middle of that day, the mountain woke. I will tell this part gently, for it is a solemn thing, and there is no need for it to be frightening here in the quiet dark. With a great force, Vesuvius sent an enormous column of ash and pumice and gas, soaring miles into the sky, a vast dark pillar that spread out at the top, Pliny wrote, like a great pine tree, or like a mushroom of cloud blotting out the sun. It was this strange and terrible cloud that the young Pliny watched in awe from across the bay. And then the ash began to fall upon Pompeii, gently at first, like a strange grey snow, and then thicker and thicker, hour after hour, a soft, relentless rain of pumice that piled up in the streets and on the rooftops. Many of the townspeople fled at once, gathering what they could carry and hurrying away down the roads, and most of them, we believe, escaped. Others sheltered in their homes, hoping to wait it out as one waits out a storm. Through the long afternoon and into the night, the ash kept falling, and the bright day turned to a darkness blacker than any night, lit only by the distant fire of the mountain, while the people prayed to their gods and held one another and waited. By the time it was over, the lively town we've wandered through all evening lay buried, silent and still beneath many feet of ash, sealed away from the world, holding its single last day safe within it. It is to the young Pliny that we owe our understanding of those hours, for he watched the whole thing unfold from the far side of the bay and wrote it down with a clear and careful eye. He described the strange cloud rising over the mountain, and how the day was turned to a darkness he compared to a sealed room with the lamp put out, and how ash fell even where he was, far across the water, so that people tied pillows to their heads against the falling stones and groped through the blackness with torches. And he told, too, of his uncle, the famous scholar and Admiral Pliny the Elder, a man of boundless curiosity, who upon seeing the great cloud ordered his ships out, partly to study the marvel and partly to rescue those trapped along the shore, and who went bravely toward the danger, and there, on the beach, overcome at last, he died, the most famous of all the lives lost that day. There is something both noble and deeply human in that story. The scholar who could not look away from a wonder, the man who turned his ships toward the disaster to help. And through the calm, observant words of his grieving nephew, written years afterward, that terrible and awesome day reaches us still, across 2,000 years, told not as a horror, but as something witnessed and remembered and set down with care so that it would not be forgotten. Is it not a remarkable kind of survival that a single thoughtful letter could carry the memory of a single day safely down across 20 centuries? And Pompeii was not alone. On the other side of the mountain lay a smaller, wealthier seaside town called Herculaneum, and it too was lost that day, though in a different manner. Where Pompeii was buried slowly under falling ash and pumice, Herculaneum was sealed by deep flows of hot volcanic material that hardened around it like stone, and in that different burial, even more was preserved. For in Herculaneum, astonishingly, organic things survived that almost never last from the ancient world. Wooden doors and beds and shelves, the wooden frames of houses, even whole scrolls of papyrus from a library, charred black but still, with patient modern science, slowly being read. Between the two towns, Pompeii and Herculaneum, we're given a double window into that vanished day, the one preserving the broad sweep of a busy town, the other preserving the very wood and writing that time almost always destroys. Together they form the richest record of ordinary Roman life that we will ever have, a gift handed down from a single afternoon 2,000 years ago. How strange and how moving that so much should have been saved by the very thing that was lost. And then came the silence. For the long centuries that followed, Pompeii simply ceased to exist. The survivors did not return to dig out a town buried so deep. The very name of the place slipped from the maps and then from memory, until the green countryside grew over the buried streets, and farmers planted their fields and their vineyards in the rich soil above, never knowing that beneath their feet, perfectly preserved in the dark, lay an entire Roman town, with its bread still in the ovens and its paintings still bright upon its walls, waiting. For nearly 1,700 years, Pompeii slept beneath the earth, lost and forgotten, a whole world holding its breath in the dark. When it was finally found, the discovery astonished the world. In the 1700s, the kings who then ruled southern Italy began to dig in the area, at first chiefly hunting for treasures and statues to adorn their palaces, and what they uncovered seemed scarcely believable. Whole painted rooms, streets, shops, the everyday objects of ancient life lying just as they had been left. Word spread across Europe, and Pompeii became one of the great wonders of the age, a place that travellers and scholars and artists journeyed to see. For here, uniquely, one could not merely read about the ancient world but walk straight into it, down real Roman streets, into real Roman homes. Over the centuries that followed, the digging slowly became a science, more careful and more respectful, less a hunt for treasure and more a patient effort to understand. The excavation goes on even to this day, with much of the buried town still waiting, untouched beneath the soil, so that Pompeii is not a finished story but a living one, still giving up its secrets, still surprising us. Is it not extraordinary to think that a part of that ancient morning still lies sleeping under the earth, even now, waiting quietly for hands not yet born to lift the ash away? And then, in the year 1748, it was found. Workers digging in the area began to uncover ancient walls and painted rooms and statues, and slowly, wonderingly, the world realized what lay beneath the soil. The excavation of Pompeii began and has continued on and off ever since, slowly lifting away the ash to reveal the town beneath, street by street, house by house. And it was here that one man, a century later, made the discovery that would give Pompeii its most haunting and human face. His name was Giuseppe Fiorelli, and in the 1860s he took charge of the excavations and brought to them a careful, scientific method. He noticed something that earlier diggers had missed. Here and there in the hardened ash, there were hollow spaces, voids, and Fiorelli realized what they were. They were the spaces left behind by the bodies of those who had not escaped, whose forms had been pressed into the ash before it hardened, and who had long since faded away, leaving only their shape like a mould in the rock. And so Fiorelli developed a technique. Into these hollow spaces he carefully poured liquid plaster and let it set, and then chipped away the surrounding ash, and there, revealed, was a perfect cast of an ancient person in their final moment. Through this gentle and respectful method, the lost people of Pompeii were given back their forms, and we can see them still, captured in the simple human postures of that last day, and feel, across 2,000 years, a deep and quiet compassion for them. They are no longer statistics of an ancient disaster. They are people, and through them, Pompeii speaks to us not only of how the Romans lived, but of our shared and tender human frailty, which has not changed at all in all the long centuries between. And the casts capture not only people, but the small living details of that last day, caught and held forever. There is the cast of a household dog, still wearing its bronze-studded collar. There are the shapes of furniture, of doors, of the roots of trees in the gardens, all recovered from their hollows in the ash, so that excavators have even been able to replant the very gardens of Pompeii with the same kinds of plants that grew there 2,000 years ago and see them bloom again. It is this, more than the grand temples or the famous mosaics, that gives Pompeii its peculiar power to move us, the smallness and the ordinariness of what was saved, a dog, a loaf, a garden, a scribbled joke. We are not, in the end, most deeply touched by the great and the mighty. We're touched by the ordinary and the human, by the things that remind us of our own lives, and Pompeii is full to overflowing with exactly those. So let us draw back now from the sorrow of that last day and remember the town as it truly was for almost all of its life, which is to say, as a place not of death, but of ordinary, vivid, abundant life. For that is the true gift of Pompeii and the reason it matters so. Because it was frozen in a single ordinary moment, it preserved for us, as nothing else ever has, the precious and the everyday, the things that are almost never written down because they are simply too ordinary to record, the shopping lists and the graffiti, the half-eaten meals and the loaves of bread, the children's toys and the garden furniture and the cooking pots, the political posters and the lovers' notes and the complaints about the wine. Through Pompeii we know the Romans not as marble statues and grand emperors, but as living, breathing, ordinary people who shopped and worked and bathed and joked and loved in a warm and pleasant town beneath a beautiful mountain on what they believed would be just another ordinary day. And in coming to know them, we come, in the end, to know something about ourselves. It is hard to overstate how much Pompeii has shaped the way the whole world pictures ancient Rome. Before it was found, the Romans were known mostly through grand literature and ruined marble, through the words of poets and the cold faces of statues, a civilization glimpsed only at its loftiest and most official. Pompeii changed all of that, forever. It gave us the kitchens and the corner shops, the painted bedrooms and the scribbled walls, the dinner left on the table and the dog by the door. It let us see Rome not from above, through emperors and battles, but from the inside, at street level, through the eyes of ordinary people living ordinary days. Almost everything we feel we know about what it was truly like to be a Roman, to walk a Roman street and enter a Roman home, comes, in some part, from this one town and its silent neighbour across the mountain. A single afternoon, frozen and kept, has taught the world more about daily Roman life than all the libraries of antiquity combined. Is it not a wonder that the deepest knowledge should come not from the grand and the deliberate, but from the accidental survival of the small and the ordinary? And so we come, slowly, to the close of our long walk through the streets of Pompeii, and to the quiet thoughts I would like to leave you with as you drift towards sleep. Let them settle over you softly, like the gentle grey ash that, in the end, settled over the town and kept it safe for us across the centuries. You do not need to hold on to any of them. Think, if you like, of how the people of Pompeii were, in every way that matters, exactly like us. They woke to ordinary mornings and worried about ordinary things, about money and love and family and the day's small tasks. They loved a good meal and a warm bath and the company of friends. They scratched jokes on walls and complained about the wine and asked their gods to keep them safe. Across 2,000 years, the human heart has not changed in the slightest. To walk through Pompeii is to walk through our own lives, dressed in older clothes, and to feel, very strongly, our deep kinship with all the ordinary people who have ever lived. Think, too, of the strange gift hidden inside the tragedy, the way the very ash that ended the town also saved it, preserving one single ordinary day so perfectly that 2,000 years later we can still walk its streets and read its words and know its people. There is something almost like grace in that out of a moment of loss came a gift to all the ages that followed, a window into the ordinary human past more vivid and more precious than any other. Nothing, perhaps, is ever truly lost. Sometimes the things we think are gone are only sleeping, safe in the dark, waiting to be found again. And think, last of all, of the simple, ordinary, precious day that Pompeii preserved, that last warm morning of bread and gossip and sunlight before anyone knew that anything was wrong. It reminds us, I think, of the quiet value of an ordinary day, of the kind of day you yourself most likely live today, full of small, unremarkable things that you will probably forget. The people of Pompeii would tell us, I think if they could, to treasure those ordinary days, the warm bath and the good meal and the familiar street and the people we love, for they are in truth the whole of a life, and they are more precious by far than we usually remember to notice. You've had such a day today, and now it is time to let it go, gently, and rest. And perhaps that is the quiet gift that Pompeii offers us across all the centuries. It does not ask us to be sad. It asks us rather to notice, to look around at our own ordinary day, the warm room, the familiar faces, the small comforts and routines, and to feel, just for a moment, how rich and how precious these unremarkable things truly are. The people of Pompeii were not waiting for some grander life to begin. They were already living it, in the bread and the baths and the gossip and the gardens, and it was good, and it was enough, and it was beautiful, and it was theirs. They simply did not know to treasure it, because it seemed, as our own days seem to us, ordinary and endless. You know better now, perhaps, lying here in the quiet. Your own ordinary day, the one just behind you, was a small treasure of exactly the kind that Pompeii kept safe for 2,000 years. And tomorrow will bring another. There is a deep peace in that knowledge, and you may rest upon it now. So let your breathing slow, and let it deepen. Feel the soft weight of your own body settling into the bed, warm and safe, as the warm streets of Pompeii grow quiet and dim around you, far away and long ago. There is nothing more to do tonight. There is nowhere you need to be. Pompeii is 2,000 years behind you, its long day finished, its people at rest, and it asks nothing of you at all. Let the town grow soft and still in your mind. Let the shopkeepers close their shutters. Let the warm light fade from the painted walls and the quiet gardens. Let the gentle ash settle, soft as snow, over the sleeping streets, and let it carry you gently down across 2,000 years of quiet time into sleep. Rest now, rest well, and I will be here again on another quiet night, with another lost world to wander, whenever you need somewhere soft and far away to go.